I never planned on being the kind of neighbor who kept favors on a running tab. Most of the time, I just nodded in the hallway, held the door open, carried a bag of groceries up if I happened to be there. That was enough. But one morning, she caught me in the stairwell, keys dangling from her hand, that quiet kind of smile people give when they're already a little rushed. She asked if I could water her plants while she was gone for a week. Just a week. Only if it's not too much trouble, she'd said, looking at me as though she already suspected I'd say yes. I don't know why my throat went dry when I answered. Sure. No problem. It should have ended there. Just plants. The first time I stepped inside her apartment, I noticed how different it felt from mine. Not louder, not brighter, just warmer. A coffee mug left upside down to dry by the sink. A folded cardigan draped over the back of a chair. The kind of lived-in details you don't think twice about until you're in someone else's space. I stood there longer than I should have, holding my phone in one hand like I might take a picture, then putting it back in my pocket before the thought got dangerous. The plants were ordinary, succulents by the window, something leafy and tall by the bookshelf. I poured water carefully, almost too carefully, as if they'd notice I was a stranger. That became my routine for a few days. Let myself in, water, glance around. I always noticed something new, a stack of library books, a record leaning against the shelf, a handwritten grocery list pinned to the fridge. It wasn't attraction in the obvious sense, not yet. It was something smaller, quieter. The way her handwriting tilted left, like she was in a hurry. The fact that one of the library books was overdue, marked with a slip tucked half in. Details that shouldn't matter but stuck anyway. When she came back, I saw her outside before she saw me. She was unlocking her door, bags hanging from her wrist, the late afternoon sun hitting her hair in a way I wouldn't have noticed on anyone else. I wanted to say something casual. Your plants survived. But what came out was, welcome back. She smiled, not wide, but enough. The kind of smile that tells you she's glad you spoke first. You didn't forget them, did you? She teased, setting her bags down, one hand still on the doorframe. No, I said quickly. Too quickly. I folded the napkin I was holding from the coffee shop, over and over, like it mattered. She noticed. I think she noticed everything. The silence between us wasn't awkward, exactly. More like the kind that waits for someone to risk filling it. I didn't. Not then. That night, I stared at my phone longer than I should have. Drafted a text, glad you're back, then deleted it. Started another, plants are fine, deleted that too. My thumb hovered over her name in my contacts, saved from when she gave me her number just in case there was a leak or something urgent. I didn't send anything. But just past midnight, my phone lit up on its own. A message from her. Thanks again for watching them. Coffee tomorrow? My treat. I read it twice. Then a third time. The napkin I'd folded was still on my desk, sharp creases running through it. And for the first time in a while, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to sleep. The coffee shop was almost empty when I walked in. She was already there, sitting by the window, stirring her drink though it didn't need stirring. She looked up when I approached, and for a moment, I felt like I'd walked into a place where I didn't quite belong. Morning, I said, setting my cup down. Morning, she echoed, her voice warm but a little tired, like she hadn't slept enough. We talked about the trip she'd taken, the weather, the usual. But after a while, the conversation slowed, leaving space that neither of us rushed to fill. She took a sip of her tea, glanced out the window, then said quietly, It's strange, coming back to an empty apartment. You get used to the silence, but sometimes it's louder than you expect. I didn't know how to answer right away. I just nodded, letting the thought settle. Then I admitted, I know what you mean. I leave the TV on sometimes, just for background. Even if I'm not watching. Her eyes flicked back to mine, soft but sharp, like she'd caught me giving something away. It should have felt ordinary, two neighbors talking over coffee. But it didn't. Not with her listening like that. Not with me wishing I had something more to offer than half confessions about television noise. She smiled faintly, resting her chin on her hand. You're too young to already be learning how to fill silences. The words landed heavier than I expected. I laughed under my breath, tried to make light of it. Guess I'm ahead of schedule. She didn't laugh. She just looked at me for a moment longer than was polite. That night, she texted again, nothing complicated, just thanks for today. I almost didn't reply, but the thought of leaving it unanswered made my chest feel tight. So I wrote back anytime. A few days later, I found myself at her door again. Not for plants this time. She'd mentioned her lamp flickering, and before I knew it, I was crouched in her living room, checking the cord. You really don't have to. She started. I don't mind, I said quickly. Too quickly. She let it go. Instead, she sat nearby with a cup of tea, watching me fumble with the outlet. I could feel her eyes on me, steady and calm, but it made my hands clumsier. When the lamp finally flickered back to life, she clapped once, soft but genuine. Look at that! A hero! I shook my head, smiling despite myself. Not exactly. As I stood, brushing my palms against my jeans, she reached out, just lightly, to steady the lamp. But her fingers brushed mine. Barely. A touch that shouldn't have meant anything, except it did. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. It became a rhythm I didn't mean to fall into. Evening light spilling across her kitchen counter. 2 mugs between us, hers with tea, mine with coffee that went cold too quickly because I was too focused on watching the way she wrapped her hands around hers. We didn't talk much. Or maybe we did, but it wasn't about anything important. Weather. Books. The odd neighbors across the hall. Small things, stretched out longer than they should have been, because either of us wanted to end the conversation first. But that night something shifted. She was laughing at a story I'd told, something clumsy I'd done at work, and then she stopped. Just stopped. The sound cut off, and the silence that followed pressed too close. Her eyes lingered on me, soft but searching. You're too easy to read, she said. I swallowed. Is that bad? She shook her head slowly, setting her mug down. It's just dangerous, maybe. Before I could ask what she meant, there was a knock at the door. Quick, careless. She stood up too fast, brushing past me, her cardigan sleeve brushing against my arm. Through the peephole, she hesitated, then opened it just wide enough. A friend, maybe her coworker. I didn't catch the name. They chatted briefly, her voice pitched lighter, more casual than it had been seconds before. I stood in the kitchen, pretending not to listen, staring at the lamp I'd fixed, like I could disappear if I didn't move. When the door closed again, she leaned back against it, exhaling like she'd been holding her breath too long. Sorry, she murmured. That was unexpected. I nodded, though my chest was tight with something I couldn't name. Jealousy? No, not that. Just the reminder that her world didn't revolve around these quiet evenings. That I was, at best, a temporary guest in it. She walked back, slower this time, as if measuring the steps between us. When she sat down again, she didn't reach for her mug. She just looked at me. I tried to say something, I should go, but the words stuck. Instead, I leaned forward without meaning to. Just slightly. Enough to notice the way her breath caught. Her hand was on the table, fingers resting close to mine. Not touching, but close enough that I felt the pull. For a second, I thought the space between us might collapse. But then she pulled back, just a fraction, just enough. She reached for her mug, though she didn't drink. Her voice was quieter when she finally spoke. We shouldn't, she said. Not unkind. More like she was reminding herself. I nodded, though my body didn't believe it. When I left that night, the air outside felt sharper, like I'd been holding my breath indoors and didn't realize it until then. And her voice, we shouldn't, kept circling back, looping with the almost that had hovered between us that we ended up walking together one evening. Not planned. I'd just come back from the store, grocery bag cutting into my palm, when I saw her locking her door. She glanced at me, hesitated, then asked if I wanted to walk a bit. It was late summer, the air still heavy with heat but softening around the edges. The sidewalks were nearly empty, the kind of quiet where you could hear your own footsteps too clearly. She asked about work, about my classes. I gave short answers, distracted by how close her shoulder was to mine. Close enough that I caught the faint scent of her perfume, or maybe just laundry soap. After a while, she stopped at a bench near the corner store and sat down, smoothing her skirt against her knees. I joined her, setting the bag at my feet. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. She broke the silence first. People talk, you know. I glanced at her. About what? She gave a faint, tired laugh. About anything. About nothing. Neighbors see things they think they understand. She traced a finger along the edge of the bench, not looking at me. It's easier if I keep my life simple. The words landed heavier than I expected. I stared at the bag between my shoes, the corner of a cereal box sticking out. My throat tightened. You think this isn't simple? I asked, softer than I meant to. She looked at me then, really looked, and I felt stripped down to nothing. It's not, she said quietly. Not for you. Not for me. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it could be, that sitting on this bench with her felt more natural than anything else I'd done in months. But the words jammed together, unshaped. Instead, I said, I don't know why I keep thinking about you. The confession slipped out before I could pull it back. My voice caught, and I almost laughed just to soften it, but I didn't. Her hands tightened in her lap. She didn't answer right away. Finally, she exhaled, slow. Don't. It wasn't sharp, not a command. More like a plea. Her eyes flicked away, toward the dim glow of the corner store sign. But the pause stretched. Her fingers unclenched, and she whispered, almost to herself, I think about you too. The words hung there, fragile, exposed, almost unreal. The night air felt charged, my pulse heavy in my ears. I shifted closer, not touching, just close enough to feel the space bending. Her breath hitched. She didn't move away. My hand hovered uncertain an inch from hers. Then she turned to me, eyes wide with something I couldn't name. Fear? Longing? Both. And before anything could happen, she whispered the question that stopped me cold. What are we doing? After that night on the bench, things shifted. Not forward, not exactly backward, just off balance, like the rhythm we'd found had been nudged sideways. She didn't text for 3 days. No good mornings, no quiet, thanks, for some small favor. I told myself she was busy, that nothing had really changed, but the silence carried weight. On the 4th evening, I saw her in the hallway. She was carrying groceries, her keys between her teeth as she fumbled with the bags. Normally I would have stepped in, offered to help. Instead I hesitated, frozen halfway out of my door. By the time I moved, she'd already managed, and the door clicked shut behind her before I got a word out. The next morning, she left earlier than usual. I heard the lock turn, softer than normal, like she was trying not to wake anyone. I kept waiting for the pattern to return, for her to appear at her window with a mug of tea or knock on my door with some small excuse. Instead, the days stretched. When I finally saw her again, it wasn't in the hallway or the stairwell, it was outside, late in the evening. She was standing by her car, talking to someone. A man, maybe my age, maybe older, I couldn't tell from across the street. He handed her something, a folder or envelope, and she laughed lightly, that polite laugh people use when they're keeping distance. Still, it landed sharp in my chest. Later, when I passed her door, I almost knocked. Hand lifted, knuckles hovering an inch from the wood. But then I heard her voice inside, low, steady, on the phone. A word floated out, son. I froze. I'd never asked if she had kids. She'd never told me. And just like that, there was another part of her life I hadn't seen, a whole dimension I hadn't been invited into. I lowered my hand and walked away. That night I drafted a text, did I do something wrong, then deleted it. Tried again, Want to grab coffee? Deleted that too. My screen glowed in the dark, the unfinished sentences sitting in my notes app like loose wires. Days passed. The silence grew heavier, but not final. Not an ending. One evening, I sat on the same bench where we'd almost crossed the line. The air was cooler now, the season tilting toward fall. Her absence felt sharper here, like the space beside me was reserved but empty. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I stayed until the streetlights buzzed on, hoping maybe she'd appear, maybe she'd walk past on her way home, maybe something. But the seat stayed empty. And when I finally stood, I left without looking back. It was raining the night it finally broke open. Not a storm, just the steady kind of rain that soaks the sidewalks and makes the air smell like wet concrete. I was coming up the stairwell with my jacket clinging to me when I saw her at her door. She'd just come home, hair damp at the ends, grocery bag slung over one arm. Our eyes met, and neither of us looked away fast enough. She hesitated, then unlocked her door and said softly, "Come in. Just for a minute." Her kitchen light was warm, humming faintly. She set the bag on the counter, pulled out milk, bread, a bunch of green onions. Normal things. She lined them up carefully, like the task mattered more than it did. I stood there dripping, unsure if I should take off my shoes, unsure of everything. Finally I said, "Did I do something?" Her hands paused mid-motion. She didn't look at me right away. "No." A beat. "Yes. Maybe." She exhaled, rubbing her forehead. "You didn't." "I did." The silence after that pressed tight. I wanted to step closer, but I stayed put, gripping the strap of my wet jacket. "I heard you," I said. "On the phone. You have a son." Her shoulders stiffened, then lowered. She nodded. "He's grown. College. Lives with his father." She finally met my eyes. "I didn't tell you because, what difference would it make? It's not like..." She stopped herself, words hanging in the air. I swallowed hard. "It makes a difference to me." Her eyes softened, but the tension didn't leave her face. "This isn't fair to you." "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I don't care." My voice cracked, but I didn't fix it. She looked at me for a long time, like she was trying to memorize something she knew she shouldn't. Then she leaned against the counter, arms crossed, not defensive, just holding herself together. "I'm afraid of what this means," she said finally. "Afraid of how it looks. Afraid I'll let you down." The words landed heavy, but not like a rejection. More like a confession she'd been choking on. I stepped closer then, slow enough for her to stop me if she wanted. She didn't. The rain tapped against the window, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. I reached out, hesitated, then set my hand on the counter near hers. Not touching. Just close. "I keep thinking, it doesn't have to be anything more than this. Just sitting here. Talking. It's enough." Her eyes flicked down at my hand, then back up. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. Not big. Just a soft, tired smile that felt like an answer. "Okay," she whispered. And somehow, that was enough to breathe again. Time moved differently after that night. Not in leaps, not in dramatic shifts, just in small adjustments that settled into something steadier. I still heard her door in the mornings, the soft click of her lock, but now it didn't sound like distance. It sounded like a rhythm. Sometimes she left earlier, sometimes later, but more often than not, we ended up walking part of the way together. Not holding hands, not anything people could point at. Just side by side. At 8:47 a.m., like clockwork, we passed the same bench near the corner store. The one where everything almost happened, and then nearly broke. Now it was just where we stopped for a moment if one of us was running late. A pause before the day stretched us out again. Coffee became our anchor. I'd bring mine black, she'd carry her tea. We'd trade sips sometimes, pretending not to grimace at the other's taste, and she'd laugh quietly in that way that wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't all-consuming. It was better than that. It was steady. There were still silences, but they weren't sharp anymore. More like soft landings. Sometimes she'd work late, and I'd leave her a note under her door, just a folded scrap of paper with a line like "Don't forget the lamp flickers again." Or "Bench tomorrow?" She'd slip one back the next day, written in her tilted handwriting, always shorter than mine but enough to make the whole day feel lighter. Once, she confessed, half embarrassed, that she'd started leaving the TV on at night, like I used to. "It helps," she said, stirring her tea without drinking it. "But not as much as talking to you." That was the closest we ever came to naming what it was. And maybe that was the point. We didn't need to. On a late autumn evening, we sat on the bench again, coats zipped, her scarf tugged high against the cold. She leaned slightly toward me, her shoulder brushing mine. Not accident, not hesitation, just there. We didn't speak for a long time. Street lights flickered on, casting halos across the pavement. I thought about the first time I'd watered her plants, how ordinary it had seemed, and how everything since had grown out of that small, forgettable favor. She finally said, almost to herself, "I don't know why this works. But it does." I nodded, watching our breath disappear into the air. "That's enough, isn't it?" She smiled, that same quiet smile that had started it all. "Yeah. It's enough." And sitting there, with the rain beginning to mist again, I realized it wasn't about crossing lines or holding back anymore. It was about showing up. Every day. In the silence, in the pauses, in the small rituals we'd built together. Something only we would understand.